Tang Mo and Fu Wenduo were teammates and he could also exchange information with Lian Yuzheng and Mu Huixiu. As for Bai Ruiao, he couldn't be regarded as a true teammate or someone they fully trusted. Thus, after the game started, Tang Mo didn't ask what restrictions Bai Ruiao received. Similarly, he didn't tell Bai Ruiao about the restrictions on his own ability. Noah's dinner on the Ark banned the use of props and had different level of restrictions on their abilities. Tang Mo's restriction was that he could only use 3 abilities and they could only be used once. Fu Wenduo's limitation was that each use of his ability could only last 3 minutes. After each use, there were 3 days and nights of cooldown time. Now Bai Ruiao said his Mortal's Death ability could only be used on one person. He chose Tang Mo and saw that Tang Mo had a strong dead air around him. Mortal's Death allowed the user to see the other person's chances of dying. Dead air was the probability of death and it wasn't a constant change. Sometimes the behavior of the ability owner could change the dead air of a target but there was no definite way to change it. Tang Mo's face didn't change after he heard Bai Ruiao's words. He just said coldly, "Are you telling the truth or a lie?" Bai Ruiao looked wronged. "Do I look like someone who will lie to you? Tang, I'm so good to you yet you're suspicious of me. I told you that my ability can only be used on one person." Fu Wenduo's low voice was heard. "What about now?" Bai Ruiao looked at him. "It can only be used 3 times and I've used it once already." "Major Fu, are you sure you want me to use it a second time?" Fu Wenduo nodded. "Yes." Bai Ruiao was indifferent. After all, his ability was really tasteless. He had already used it on Tang Mo in this game and couldn't change it later. He stared at Tang Mo, a glow in his eyes. 3 seconds later, he closed his eyes and spread open his hands. "It is a pity. There seems to be a lot less dead air. Tang, it must be something I did that helped you reduce the dead air. Do you want to thank me?" Tang Mo didn't bother talking to him. He suspected Bai Ruiao because this person's combat abilities were extremely high and didn't require an ability. Among all the senior players in the world, those like Bai Ruiao were a minority. Even Mu Huixiu said that without her ability, she might necessarily be Bai Ruiao's opponent. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that among the 17 players who entered the castle, Bai Ruiao was probably one of the strongest players. After this conversation, his doubts towards Bai Ruiao were temporarily cleared. Bai Ruiao didn't have a reason to kill the woman. They didn't know each other and he was a really cautious person. Every time he made a mess, it was on the basis that he could leave and save his life. This time, the Black Tower banned the use of all props and the players in the game were also scary. Bai Ruiao desperately needed a clue for the 7th floor and wanted to be one of the first 3 to clear the game. Thus, he wouldn't mess around. As long as he wasn't the Black Tower monster, he wouldn't kill anyone. Bai Remote opened his mouth. Tang, Major Fu, do you have anyone you doubt?" Fu Wenduo replied. No. Tang Mo was also honest. "No. Still, I think that Fu Wenduo's words make sense. The black woman's killer is likely an American player." Bai Ruiao smiled. "You never thought that besides an American player, there might be a person who can make her relax her vigilance?" Tang Mo frowned. "For example?" Bai Remote laughed. "That old man? He is an old man and shouldn't be strong. How can he kill someone?" Fu Wenduo coldly corrected his mistake. "George Ansanai is also an American player." Bai Ruiao's eyes widened. "Hey, he is an American player? I didn't pay attention." "Tang Mo, this person was an annoying poop stick." The 3 people went to bed and pulled up the quilt. Tang Mo and Fu Wenduo whispered some player information and doubts from the 2 daytime hours while Bai Ruiao occasionally inserted a few words. His words were generally nonsense but there were sometimes useful information. Time passed and there were 5 minutes left in the night. Tang Mo and Fu Wenduo were ruling out some suspicious targets when Bai Ruiao suddenly smiled. "Speaking of which, if a name is written on the red ticket. Tang, Major Fu, will we be considered teammates?" The grab the 6th mode meant the top 3 players/teams who cleared the 6th floor would get a clue about the 7th floor. Originally, Tang Mo and Fu Wenduo hadn't teamed up with Bai Ruiao but the Black Tower assigned them into a team. The 3 people shared a red ticket. Even if Tang Mo and Fu Wenduo didn't want to be with Bai Ruiao, they were tied together. If they wrote a name on the red ticket, it would surely have team members, Tang Mo, Fu Wenduo, Bai Ruiao. Unless... Tang Mo casually asked, "What if you are dead?" Bai Ruiao exclaimed in an exaggerated manner. Tang, do you want me to die?" Tang Mo didn't speak anymore. The first ray of sunlight entered the room. Tang Mo pulled off his quilt and said, "I didn't go out last night." Fu Wenduo told him, "I didn't either." Bai Ruiao refused to release his hold on the quilt. "Hehe, I didn't go out." The trio glanced at each other before getting up and walking out the door. As they opened the door, they happened to see Lian Yuzheng and 2 European players come out the door. The players glanced at each other and walked towards the stairs. Halfway there, the European man sniffed. "What is that smell?" Tang Mo's expression changed. "Something burnt." Fu Wenduo cried out, "There is a bloody smell." The group quickly walked to the stairs and looked down. They saw that beside the long table, a blackened human figure was lying on the ground, its limbs aimed at the sky. Tang Mo's gaze moved and his eyes narrowed when he saw the things beside the body. Lian Yuzheng was shocked. 2 people are dead. 16 small puppets were wary towards each other. Fire burned them to black ash, leaving 15 left. 15 small puppets tried to escape in the night. Thousands of bloody knives struck and 14 were left. Blood stained the ground a deep red. Once all players came out of their rooms, they saw this scene and made a nauseous expression. They were all senior players who experienced many games, but this type of death was too cruel. Even the returnees wouldn't cruelly cut people into hundreds of pieces of meat. They would simply kill each other for the rest time. Yes, 2 people died on the second night. One of them was burned to black ash and the other was cut into many pieces by knives, so that their identities weren't clear. On the table, 2 little puppets fell off and broke. The people looked at the back of the chairs and found the names of the 2 people who died. Muhwixu stated, the Russian player, Anatoly Kurbsky. Andrei spoke the name of the player who had been cut into pieces, the US player, David Enders. These bodies were very difficult to deal with. The remaining 14 cleaned up the pieces of meat on the ground and carried the Russian player's body to the 3rd floor attic. Fu Wenduo moved slightly when he opened the door and Tang Mo asked from behind him. What's the problem? Fu Wenduo was silent for a moment before moving aside to let the players see the scene inside the attic. The woman's body is gone. The attic was empty. The players quickly went inside and searched the attic. This attic was narrow and nothing could be seen apart from a broken chair. The body was truly gone. It must have been stolen by someone last night. Lian Yuzheng spoke. I don't know why someone stole the body, but it is better to not put the 2 new bodies in the attic. The male European player rejected her suggestion. Is there a difference where we put it? He smiled and looked around. No matter where we put it, the culprit will know. They placed the body of the Russian and American player in the attic and went downstairs. Fu Wenduo closed the door and said, it can't be locked. Tang Mo told him, there is no meaning to locking it. We might not be able to use props, but an ordinary lock has no meaning to us. Suddenly, 2 players were gone. The Russian player and America David were all one-man chairs. Now their chairs were empty and only 9 people remained sitting at the long table. The Southeast Asian player, Abdullah, who hardly spoke, scanned every player with cold eyes. His eyes were like a serpent, wet and murky. He opened his mouth before closing it, apparently deciding not to speak. It wasn't just him. The information that they obtained was too much today. The players thought about it for a long time before Li Xia finally opened her mouth. Are we sure that black woman is really dead? The old man looked at her. If it is yesterday's body, I am sure it is dead. You all checked it. She really was dead. Li Xia told him, but her body is gone. The European Lena sneered. So what? Do you suspect that a body ran away on its own? The short-haired woman glanced at all the players with disdain. One of you stole the body. She is truly dead. If it was a smokescreen, then the Black Tower wouldn't hide it. Tang Mo quietly glanced at this woman. He had the same thought. After the discovery of the black woman, Tang Mo's first thought it was a smokescreen. In the Snowstorm Villa mystery mode, the murderer also falsified their death to escape suspicion. The 17 players were the most powerful in the world and no one knew what the other person held. If the black woman's ability was to let herself fall into a state of suspended animation, it wasn't impossible to deceive others about his death. However, as soon as this thought appeared, Tang Mo rejected it. Her name on the back of the chair was crossed out and her puppet fell to pieces. The rules also state that everyone has the right to vote in the last minute of every day. Tang Mo continued, the Black Tower would update a new white ticket at her seat if she isn't dead. The Black Tower didn't do this because she is already dead. The possibility of false death was ruled out and there was only one possibility left. Bai Ruiao opened his mouth. It isn't enough to kill 2 players. They also stole a body. This is a bit interesting. Mu Huixu knocked on the table. Why did the monster steal the woman's body? Or why did they only steal it the next night? After the monster killed the woman, they could have hidden the body directly. What is the reason for stealing the body and what do they want to get from it? No one could answer this question. Fu Wenduo said, let's wait for the next day to see if the 2 bodies from today will disappear. Bai Ruiao smiled and cocked his head. Then the problem is, last night, 3 players were qualified to go out and 2 died. Who is the last person? Only 14 players remaining to be suspected. Tang Mo determined that among the 7 Chinese players, apart from Li Xia who he wasn't familiar with, the other 6 definitely weren't Black Tower monsters. At the same time, they wouldn't have any reason to kill the players. Then one of the 8 remaining people must be the killers. The weirdest one was the good Southeast Asian player and a silent East Asian player. There were the 2 European players who were a team, the old American player and the 2 American male players who were a team. Then there was the Chinese player Li Xia. Every one of the 8 people were suspects. Normally, the physical fitness of the elderly wasn't as good as young people and a woman's physical fitness wasn't as good as men. In the situation where abilities were restricted, it was difficult for a woman or old man to kill 2 powerful male players at once. Tang Mo's gaze was fixed on the 5 male players. At this time, an American player opened his mouth. David Enders, I've actually heard of him. He is from the US District 2, New York. His ability is similar to mirror reflections. I don't know the details but he is very skilled in combat. It is hard for him to be killed even if his ability is restricted. He was very powerful. Tang Mo looked over and remembered that this player was called Belfauska. Another American player opened his mouth. Yes, they also killed 2 players at once. The killer's strength is absolutely high. This was John Brooks, an American player. These 2 people were teammates. Fu Wenduo glanced at Andrei. Do you know the 2 Russian players? Andrei shook his head. I don't know. The Russian player's identity was unknown, but it was obvious from his muscles that he was a strange player. The old man suddenly opened his mouth. We might not know their strength and abilities, but there is something that all of us know. The first person to clear a tower attack game Fu Wenduo, the first person to clear the hard mode Tang Mo, the first person on the time leaderboard Mu Huixiu, the first people to clear the 5th floor Lina Jiafas and Don Savik. The old man's voice was calm. The senior players have high and lows. A strong fighting ability doesn't mean the game can be cleared. The 5 of you can be called the most powerful players in this castle. Li Xia added, you can add him. He looks like a player who attacks the tower with force. She pointed to Andre. The Southeast Asian player opened his mouth. A total of 6 people. The old man said, yes, these 6 people are powerful enough to kill 2 players at once. Clap. The group looked at the person who suddenly clapped. Bai Ruiao laughed. This reasoning is wonderful. There is no harm in excluding them. However, there is one thing I'm not happy about. Tang can be considered a strong person. Tang Mo suddenly realized why the other person wanted to say and reprimanded him. Bai Ruiao. Bai Ruiao covered his mouth and sneered. You don't know what his ability is. If you know his ability, you will know that it is impossible for him to kill 2 players in a situation where it is restricted. Tang Mo moved as if to attack Bai Ruiao. Fu Wenduo was faster and pointed a gun at Bai Ruiao's head. Bai Ruiao raised his hands innocently. Am I wrong? Tang Mo's eyes narrowed and he stared at the baby-faced youth. A moment later, he held down Fu Wenduo's hand and Fu Wenduo put away the gun. He turned to glance at the players who had different expressions. Now you can guess if my companion revealing that I am a waste if my ability is blocked is acting or not. We might be hoping that after you block my ability and someone else dies, the suspicion that I am the killer will be removed. The corners of Tang Mo's lips curved. Which one do you think it is? At the end of the 3rd day, Bai Ruiao wrote George Ensenai on the paper, who was the old man. The rest of the players also wrote names on the paper. The group returned to their room. The moment the door closed, Tang Mo formed a first and aimed it at Bai Ruiao. Bai Ruiao had long been prepared. As he said, without his ability, Tang Mo wasn't a match. He easily blocked Tang Mo's attack, but Fu Wenduo moved, forcing Bai Ruiao to take 2 steps back. There was no longer the calmness from the long table. Tang Mo raised his head, his eyes cold. They didn't vote for me, but Bai Ruiao, if there is a next time then you can try it. Bai Ruiao leaned against the wall and watched Tang Mo and Fu Wenduo. My guess is that people voted for the black woman on the first day because she talked too much. The next day was probably Mu Huixiu. It is because she is too strong and is first on the time leaderboard. Now the one voted for, he turned to look at Fu Wenduo. Major Fu. Fu Wenduo glanced at him and didn't deny it. Bai Ruiao smiled. You see Tang, I did this intentionally. If you are strong then they will vote for you next. They are blocked the ability of the most powerful players in order. Who do you think is next? I don't think it will be you. It will probably be that European woman or Andre. Tang Mo no longer paid attention to Bai Ruiao. He really couldn't understand this psychopath's thoughts. Sometimes he thought that Bai Ruiao's actions were purposeful while other times it was just to sow chaos. The 3 people pulled up their quilt and Bai Ruiao was preparing to talk when Tang Mo pulled out his gun and pointed it at Bai Ruiao. Bai Ruiao blinked helplessly. Tang, Major Fu, an abnormal person has an advantage. Their brain circuits are sometimes very different. Tang Mo raised his eyebrows. Are you admitting that you are abnormal? Bai Ruiao made a surprised expression. Don't you see me like that? Fu Wenduo said, he just thinks you have a mental disorder. Then he added, I am the same. Bai Ruiao was moved. You only think that I have a mental disorder? I didn't expect to still have some image in your hearts. Tang Mo, Fu Wenduo, forget neurotic minds have a wide range of thinking and children with intellectual disabilities are much happier. Thanks to Bai Ruiao's actions during the day, the other players understood that Tang Mo was a person who relied on his ability to pass the game. At the same time, this lowered their suspicions of Tang Mo. Now that everyone's abilities were greatly restricted, Tang Mo's ability to kill was weakened. For at least 3 more days and nights, they wouldn't focus on Tang Mo but would pay attention to Fu Wenduo, Mu Huixiu, and others. In the dark room, Bai Ruiao's annoying voice continued, right, do you really think that the Black Tower monster killed the 3 people? Tang Mo was stunned. His brain worked quickly but he couldn't grasp the feeling. Fu Wenduo asked, what do you want to say? Bai Ruiao grinned. Major Fu, I already said that the brains of an abnormal person are different. Of course, this is just my guess but maybe they weren't killed by the monster. Perhaps they were killed by players. For example, let's say that on the first day, you, I and the black woman were the ones who could go outside. I deliberately killed the black woman and let you misunderstand that I am the Black Tower monster. If you are stupid and write my name on the red ticket, you will lose the right to grab the 6th. Tang Mo spoke up. What about killing 2 people on the 2nd day? Bai Ruiao corrected him. Tang, you wronged me. I said that I didn't go out at night or kill anyone. Tang Mo's expression didn't change. It is just an example. Bai Ruiao said helplessly, how can I refute you? Major Fu will probably beat me up. Killing those 2 people, Bai Ruiao's voice stopped and Tang Mo reflexively raised his head. In the darkness, the baby-faced youth's bright eyes were covered in a layer of something, making him feel cold. Bai Ruiao spoke like it was natural. killing the other players and directly eliminating the enemy. This is more convenient. Night passed. Tang Mo confirmed that he and Fu Wenduo didn't go out at night and opened the door to leave. Tang Mo was just about to walk to the stairs when he saw Mu Huixiu standing by the stairs, her head lowered as she looked at it. Tang Mo had never seen this expression on Mu Huixiu's face. She stood there quietly and didn't speak. She noticed Tang Mo's gaze and turned her head. Something flashed in her eyes as her lips opened before closing. Fu Wenduo frowned and a thought flashed through his head. Tang Mo had already walked forward and arrived at Mu Huixiu's side. He gazed at where Mu Huixiu was looking and his eyes widened when he saw the body. After a few seconds, Tang Mo walked down the stairs and checked the body. He turned to look at Fu Wenduo. Dead. It is like the song. The cause of death is a knife through the heart. Sure enough, it is impossible to find out if a person leaves at night. The black tower concealed him and we didn't discover that he went outside. We didn't notice this face until we left the room. Mu Huixiu's fingers clenched and she sighed. I didn't expect that fly. She stopped and changed her words. Fox would really die. Tang Mo lowered his head and stared at Bai Ruiao's wide eyes and the dark hole in his chest. His eyes stopped on the right arm, which had been cut off. After a long time, Tang Mo smiled. He still owes me a favor yet he died, it is really my loss. Added a KO5 for the people asking for an alternative to Patreon. https://ko5.com/rainbow turtle pledge any amount to my Patreon to access to the BL Google Drives, where you can get early access to any chapters I have completed. You can also join my Discord channel to chat with fellow readers about the novels.